That tub of margarine in your fridge was once taxed, banned, smuggled across state lines, and legally required to be dyed pink, so you'd find it too repulsive to buy. For nearly a century, the butter lobby convinced lawmakers to turn a cheap spread into contraband. It began in 1869 with a French emperor, a hungry army, and a chemist who'd die in poverty. 3 years before securing his landmark patent, Hippolyte Maurice entered a contest launched by Napoleon III. The challenge was simple: create an affordable, stable alternative to scarce butter. Maurice delivered by emulsifying processed beef tallow with skimmed milk and pig gastric juices. He called the resulting white, pearlescent paste oleomargarine, drawing on the Greek word for pearl. This cheap concoction successfully mimicked the spreadability of dairy butter at a fraction of the cost. But instead of managing the production himself, the inventor sold his manufacturing rights to the Dutch firm Jurgens in 1871. He would pass away in 1880, leaving others to build a massive commercial empire on his recipe. Jurgens immediately scaled the process, transforming a French laboratory experiment into a massive Dutch manufacturing operation. By the mid-1870s, the cheap spread crossed the Atlantic to the United States. It arrived at the perfect time. For working-class families struggling to afford basic dairy, this imitation butter was a financial lifesaver, selling for a fraction of the cost of the real thing. Within a single decade, approximately 37 American margarine manufacturers sprang up to meet the soaring demand. Millions of households filled their tables with the substitute. The product grew from a quirky scientific novelty into a booming, highly visible industry. And for American dairy farmers watching their profits slip away, this cheap white paste was an economic declaration of war. American dairy farmers did not see a harmless alternative on grocery shelves. They saw a direct threat to their survival. Butter was the financial anchor of the family farm, and this cheap mimic threatened to drag down prices and put thousands of producers out of business. To combat this industrial invader, dairy interests organized. What began as scattered rural complaints quickly unified into a highly disciplined, powerful political force. Their strategy relied on changing the terms of the fight. While the underlying motive was pure economic protection, the public campaign was framed as a moral crusade for consumer health and purity. The butter lobby painted margarine as a deceptive, dangerous fraud, an unnatural concoction of animal fat and chemical additives designed to trick unsuspecting households. They claimed that the artificial spread was toxic and inferior, arguing that government intervention was the only way to save honest families from eating counterfeit food. With farmers representing a massive, highly coordinated voting bloc across dairy-heavy states, lawmakers quickly fell into line. Market competition was no longer enough. This bitter commercial rivalry was ready to move from the grocery store to the legislative floor. The lobby prepared its first regulatory strikes, but their strangest weapon was still to come. Congress struck first with the Federal Oleomargarine Act of 1886. This law imposed a 2-cent per pound excise tax on margarine, which acted as a government-mandated price hike on working-class families. To enforce this, officials required paper tax stamps on every package and forced businesses to buy expensive annual licenses just to stay in the game. Manufacturers had to pay $600, wholesalers paid $480, and even small-town retail grocers had to shell out $48 a year. In some regions, dairy-dominated local governments skipped the taxes entirely and banned the spread outright. The federal squeeze tightened in 1902 with a highly targeted dual tax structure. If margarine remained in its natural white state, the tax fell to 1/4 cent per pound. But if a manufacturer colored it yellow, the tax skyrocketed to 10 cents a pound, a deliberate effort to make the butter clone too expensive to buy. The federal tax structure made yellow margarine expensive, but state governments decided to make it illegal. This fight was no longer about what went into the spread, but what it looked like on a plate. Naturally, margarine was a pale, pasty white, visually identical to lard. Butter, however, carried a warm golden hue that consumers culturally associated with freshness and quality. Dyeing margarine yellow made the cheap imitation feel instantly familiar and appetizing to the average shopper, bridging the psychological gap between the factory and the kitchen table. To stop this, dairy state legislators targeted appearance. While federal laws taxed the color, state-level prohibitions banned it outright. Historical records indicate that by the late 1890s, 32 of the 45 states had passed laws making it illegal to sell margarine dyed yellow. If the substitute could not look like butter, the lobby believed, customers simply would not buy it. Yet even these sweeping bans were not enough. The butter lobby's strangest weapon was still to come. In 1884, Vermont lawmakers ruled that margarine must be dyed a bright, lurid pink. Over the next decade, New Hampshire, South Dakota, West Virginia, and Minnesota enacted identical laws. The purpose was to make the product look so repulsive that no consumer would ever willingly put it on their dinner table. This forced discoloration served as a psychological weapon, but the legal battle reached the United States Supreme Court in 1898. In Margarine Company versus State of Minnesota, the court struck down the pink mandates as unconstitutional. The justices observed that a forced pink hue naturally excites a prejudice and creates a repugnance up to the point of an absolute refusal to purchase. The ruling established that the dye served a commercial stigma rather than a culinary purpose. The pink laws were dead, but the broader push to keep margarine looking like plain white lard remained active in dozens of states. This left manufacturers with a massive hurdle. How would consumer demand respond when the only legal option looked like a block of industrial grease? The solution arrived inside a small, greasy envelope. Since federal and state laws made pre-colored margarine prohibitively expensive or outright illegal, companies like Parquet and Swift started selling the paste in its natural, lard-white state, but they tucked a separate packet of yellow dye inside the box. Consumers had to sit at their kitchen tables and manually knead the golden, oil-soluble powder into the stiff white block until the color blended evenly. For those unwilling to labor over their food, an illegal trade filled the void. Smugglers packed vehicles with yellow margarine purchased in lenient territories, hauling the contraband across state lines into strict dairy states. These border-crossing runs became a localized, domestic echo of Prohibition-era bootlegging, complete with hidden trunk compartments, vehicle seizures, and sudden police inspections. While state inspectors levied fines and confiscated shipments, they could not suppress the underlying reality. An ordinary kitchen spread had been transformed into genuine contraband, and consumer demand consistently outpaced the government's ability to police the breakfast table. Wartime scarcity ultimately broke the dairy lobby's stranglehold. During the food shortages of World War I and World War II, real butter grew scarce and expensive. Households turned to margarine out of sheer necessity, and millions of families grew accustomed to the taste. At the same time, manufacturers abandoned beef tallow, reformulating the spread with inexpensive hydrogenated vegetable oils like cottonseed and soybean oil. As post-war tastes shifted, the old legal restrictions crumbled one by one. The final dairy stronghold fell in Wisconsin. On July 1, 1967, Governor Warren Knowles signed the repeal of the state's 72-year ban on yellow margarine. Today, the plastic tub sits quietly in almost every refrigerator door. It is cheap, abundant, and completely unremarkable, a silent survivor of a 100-year war that almost everyone forgot ever happened. Today, our plates remain corporate battlefields, quietly shaped by invisible lobbying. Margarine survived its trial by pink dye, but the government's power to police your food never truly went away. It makes you wonder what else in your fridge is secretly undercover. Subscribe for more hidden history.